First, I should say that I was practically a virgin and innocent and ignorant in matters psychedelic. I come from a different country, even though my biological generation in the United States has been much involved with those things, I was not. But as I said, I like to travel. I've been all over the world. And all through my traveling, I've been to both remote and strange places. So I get kind of a door is half open, I get into that. So I was invited to that ritual knowing nothing what it would be. The first time it was, I remember just a couple of years before that, I had a number of years of very orthodox classical Freudian psychoanalysis in Israel. And the end of that night session, it was not a whole night, it was a shorter session, it was 6 hours. I felt I've learned more during that session than in all those years of psychoanalysis put together. But in terms of visualizations, I had some, but actually very little. As I was in the morning leaving the village, somebody who spoke Spanish ran after me, and he said that in 2 days they have the ritual where they prepare the daime, and that takes place 3 times a year. So it's an opportunity, and I'm being invited. So I stayed. I didn't even think about it that I might be drinking during that ritual. I was invited to a ceremony, so I was interested, I was curious, and I stayed. And nor did I know that when in that kind of ritual, the dosages are very, very high. There's only men, only 8 men in an enclave of virgin forest, pounding the twigs of the ayahuasca. And it was a day that now I can say that it's changed my life as a person. I had very powerful visualizations all the time. And later I ended up staying for a whole week in that village, drinking for another 2 times during that week. When I came back to my homeland, I found only one book about the topic at the Hebrew University Library. And then I was startled to read that the things that were said that the Indians are seeing with ayahuasca, and the things I myself have seen with it, were of the same semantic categories. I'm not saying identical, but the same categories. For instance, seeing fabulous palaces. I'm not saying that it would be the same castle or same palaces, or if we drew it, it would look identical. But in terms of semantic categories, they were indeed the same semantic categories. So I was very intrigued by that. I should say that my training in cognition began with linguistics, theoretical linguistics, and my interest both in language and later in cognition was to a large extent in the universals of cognition. But universals of cognition in language are primarily formal constraints. They do not they pertain to form or to processing constraints, but not to content as such. And here there were similarities in content. So I was really intrigued. I continued reading about it. And I noted with with respect to the academic literature, which was very meager at the time. I'm speaking now 16 years ago, and the literature was written perhaps 25, 30 years. And I noted two things. First, in terms of academic disciplines, the literature was of two clusters. Either the natural sciences, pharmacology, botany, perhaps applied clinical medicine, or on the other hand, cultural anthropology. And the leading people at the time, like the anthropologist Rachel Dolmatov, the ethnobotanist Schultes, that I was fortunate enough to meet a couple of times just before he passed away, they attributed what's happening with ayahuasca to the rich fantasy of the primitive so-called man or human beings. And I thought it can't be that I come from a totally different sociocultural and personal background, so I thought it's not the mind of people of a certain culture or region, but the mind of Homo sapiens. And then I further thought that the discipline, the proper discipline, academic discipline for that, is neither botany or pharmacology nor cultural anthropology, but rather the study of consciousness, cognition and consciousness. Without the plants, nothing would happen, surely. You need the culture to sustain an experience that might be quite difficult, also to invest it with meaning. But the domain is experience, which was so happened to be my line of work all of it beforehand. I was studying, nowadays, for the past decade, conscious studies has become very much in vogue in the cognitive sciences. But I began to study consciousness, ordinary consciousness, almost 30 years ago, when it was almost a taboo field. I was studying the inner life of human beings, like mental imagery that goes in the spontaneously in the head, verbal mentation that passes. So that was one realization that I had, that the discipline is conscious studies rather than the other ones. And the second thing I noted in the literature, that the top people who have been studying ayahuasca at the time, the situation has changed since, had either very, very little or perhaps even no first-hand experience with it. And I thought it was kind of funny. Nobody would even imagine, write a book about music without ever having heard music. I'm not saying that in order to write a theoretical book about music, you have to be a composer, you have to be a Beethoven. No, but to have listened to music. And that's more or less was the situation then. So a year later, I returned to the Amazon. I ended up spending a year and a half in the Amazon, in mostly Brazil and Peru, but also Colombia and Ecuador. I didn't go as an investigator. I was going as a curious individual and as a student to study from different ayahuasqueros in many different places. And that sense I was also different from the anthropologists. Anthropologists usually are interested in a community, in a tribe, in a society. So they go to a specific place, they settle down, they mingle in a tribe, and they study it. For me, the interest was not the society, was not the culture, but Homo sapiens, the mind of human beings, and I was placing myself as the guinea pig, changing the context, both the geographic context and the context in terms of ritual, varying it on myself. And I've taken partaking of ayahuasca almost 70 times until I began thinking of changing perspective and turning from the student to the investigator. If you want, I could say something about that later on.